So I wanted to make a video about Forspoken. Part of the reason being that because it is a very divisive title in the gaming community, as you all know. Some people loved it, some people hated it, some people only tried the demo and made the decision based off that, which is perfectly acceptable and understandable. But I wanted to give my thoughts and kind of just pick up my YouTube streaming again before I get the PlayStation VR 2 and start streaming there with that. So basically, let's start with the graphics. The graphics definitely received a downgrade from what we originally saw in the launch, or I'm sorry, in the original announcement trailer. I will say that there are several graphics modes, performance mode, ray tracing mode, fidelity mode, each with their own high frame rate variation, and you can also have VRR. VRR is functional. The game does support it. I'm going to leave performance separate from graphics and then talk about that separately because it is something that needs to be touched on for this game. As far as graphics go, the game does certainly have issues. It stuns in a lot of ways with its draw distance. It's absolutely a beautiful title in its own right, but when weighed up against games like Horizon Forbidden West, it does fall short. I would say that it lives somewhere in the realms between Elden Ring and Horizon, and that is not in any way a negative thing. Elden Ring is an absolutely stunning game, and in many ways, in many places, it's prettier than Forspoken, but they are similar in a lot of ways. The big difference with Forspoken being that the draw distance is, especially for foliage, hugely impressive. Grass and bushes and trees and the like draw out into the distance so far that you can't really see the draw line even when you're moving forward, and you do move forward a lot in this game because it is a game about traversal. The graphics modes are all separate from each other in a lot of ways. The only issue that I really had with the graphics modes was that the ray tracing draw distance, specifically for shadows, actually leaves something to be desired. And that's simply because you can actually see the line in the draw distance where the ray tracing stops and the baked-in shadows are there. Baked-in shadows are very crisp and defined regardless of the distance that you're looking at them from. And of course, the ray traced shadows get progressively softer as they move away from the object and the light source, which is correct. The downside to the graphics modes, I would say, is the performance mode. Again, I will talk about performance separately, but this mode is called performance, and I'm talking about the graphics in performance mode. A lot of times performance mode runs in such a bad resolution, I want to say something like 720p, and it's, at least on my television, and I play on a 65-inch 4K television with HDR. On my television, it is very noticeable when the dynamic resolution scales down to keep the game running at 60 frames per second. So I would say the lack of optimization for performance mode is very apparent, unfortunately. It is a stunning game, like I said, in a lot of ways. The magic in particular, the amount of enemies that you can fight at one time can number what feels like in the dozens and dozens, if not hundreds. And the character models and the world and stuff are all quite gorgeous, but they're not going to necessarily win any awards when stacked against other games, especially ones that came out exclusively for PlayStation 5 and PC in 2023, or anywhere near actually through 2022. So Forspoken is a beautiful game in its own right, but it definitely has its own issues when it comes to graphics. The architecture and the environments are quite beautiful, especially some of the more densely packed environments, like rocky, mountainous environments, really shine. And they don't actually build procedurally. Level of detail doesn't really show. Although I don't want to say it doesn't show, because I did see some instances of it during play. The level of detail distance it's not apparent enough that it causes any issues or is noticeable in any way. On to performance. Again, I'm going to have to just sweep through all three modes. I did play the game in ray tracing mode throughout with VRR enabled. So the game ran at 40 frames per second for me at what I want to say is something like 1440p in ray tracing. Irrelevant, because you can't really tell when you're looking at it whether you're looking at 1440 or 1800 or whatever. The game moves very quickly. With combat and traversal, you are constantly moving at a speed of probably over 20 miles an hour. So the game doesn't really need to showcase beyond that. I want to say the biggest problem that I had with performance was actually in frame rate. Even with VRR enabled, which usually cleans up dropped frames, I did notice there is noticeable slowdown especially in some of the denser areas, rockier areas like I was talking about earlier. Those rocky areas tend to bog down the frame rate some, and I do want to say that this video was created before the upcoming Forspoken update, which has been promised. The developers have committed to fixing the gameplay's performance issues, which is where I think most people had problems. But the performance is never bad enough. And again, I was playing with VRR. I do not know what the game is like without it. Perhaps I will try to play the game without VRR and see how it goes and then make an additional video. But based on my experience with it, the frame rate, though it noticeably drops, was never impactful enough on the gameplay to cause me any forms of issues at all. The game played smoothly enough that I enjoyed it throughout in terms of its playability. The performance mode, all modes, as far as I know, seem to stutter and lose frames, but performance mode never in my play, and again, I played the game 40 frames per second in ray tracing mode, not quality resolution mode, nor performance mode, but I did try all three modes intermittently throughout my gameplay, just because why wouldn't you? The options are there. I played in performance for a few hours. I played with VRR enabled, so the game was targeting what I believe is 60 frames per second at 1080p, but it could be higher than that. I don't know for sure. I did not notice any dropped frames. I didn't notice any major slowdown or noticeable stutter in this mode, but like I said earlier in the video, unfortunately the resolution does tank significantly enough that it was noticeable loss in picture quality. And for me, the toss-up was not there. It just wasn't worth it for me to lose picture quality to such a noticeable degree for those extra frames. And as many of you know, I am more of a visual fidelity guy. I prefer ray tracing, 4K, reflective surfaces, denser atmospherics, fog, prettier lighting, etc. to frame rate, which I know is not the common, well, it's not common, but that's me. I don't care about common. And next I want to talk about the gameplay, because gameplay is king. This is also a mishmash of opinions here, and I want to go over the things that I did not like first. In some ways, this game feels like it was developed by someone who has not only never made a video game, which is possibly true, but also perhaps has not played one, at least in the modern era. A lot of the game, and this is my biggest gripe with the game, a lot of the gameplay is stopped for narrative. And that's fine because I love cutscenes, I love narrative, I love animation, I love stories in video games more than any other aspect of video games, often even king over gameplay for me. But I will say that the gameplay is getting the bad things out of the way first. There are instances where the game will literally have you having a conversation with Cuff, which is the little gold dude on Frey's arm. Frey is the main character. Cuff is the dude that is on her arm, well, the Cuff link that gives her her magic. These conversations with Cuff, Frey will like stop and hold the Cuff up like this and talk to it. And while that's happening, you can't move. You can move the camera around, but you can't move Frey around. And considering that it's a game about speed and traversal and capability and momentum, it feels weird because the game literally stops you from moving to have these conversations. And it's so jarring in a lot of ways that I often skipped some of that dialogue, which some of it could have been integral. But I did end up, and then that happens repeatedly throughout the game. There are not just that, but these pauses in gameplay. Like you'll read books at your hideouts, your stop points, your save points, where you can craft and upgrade things. And you'll read these books, and you can read 3 books at a time. And the books essentially tell you, hey, go do this magic spell 10 times, or go do this magic spell 25 times while killing the last enemy on the field, or go do this traversal capability you just learned in a very specific way. And what happens when you do that, when you complete that lesson, your magic gets upgraded, and that's great. It's an awesome system. It works out great. It encourages you to learn the magic, to use it appropriately, and the skills. The issue is that when you unlock this magic, you go back into the menu, you press and hold X, it fills up this bar, and then it says, ta-da, you've completed this. Then you have to pause while it moves the text up, and then the benefits, like no longer uses stamina and red magic +1 appears on screen, and then it says, this magic spell has been completed, and this whole time you're stuck in the menu. And it's just, maybe it wouldn't be so bothersome in other games, but in Forspoken, again, a game about momentum and movement and speed, a game that is constantly fast and frenetic, to have these jarring pause moments. These also happen during cutscenes. During cutscenes, the actors will be having a discussion with each other, and then one of the actors will say something that, like, changes the mood, and the screen will slowly fade to black, and then it'll unfade from black to the next scene. It's just a camera cut, but it's suddenly a 5-second long camera cut that feels like it's almost going to commercial. Again, strange design choice. And little design choices like this exist throughout the game that stop the gameplay for sometimes 10, 20 seconds at a time, and it doesn't feel good. So that's my biggest complaint about gameplay. Outside of that, the battle system, once you understand it, is so much fun. Once you unlock all the powers, water, electricity, fire, Frey's purple magic, and then her final magic, I don't want to spoil anything. Once you unlock those and you've learned to string them together and get good grades on your fighting, because it's an RPG, and you are graded in your execution of your style, almost like Devil May Cry in your battle. Fire is more melee, although there are non-melee attacks with it. Frey's purple magic is like earth, and then there's like water attacks and lightning attacks. There are like 3 levels of spells. There are the really fast, constant use ones that charge up as you just fire off. There are like 2nd level spells that are called supportive magic, and essentially it, like in fire, you can lay down two friends to help fight two fire allies, and then have two fire swords that are like options in an old school fly shooter. And then you can switch to rock and throw rocks and shoot them super fast, and then charge one up until it's huge and throw it at it and create an earth explosion, and then set a trap and do a backflip and switch to electricity and shoot super fast. It's a very, very fun game once you have the battle system down. The traversal is parkour. It's fast-paced. When you first are traversing, it feels a little inhibitive, which makes sense because it is a video game and you should have progression and character development and character growth with abilities and capabilities and speed, so on and so forth. Essentially, once you've got two of the power sets unlocked, basically Frey's purple magic, earth, and Sila's magic, which is fire, you start having like this tether you can throw out and pull yourself to objects, or pull enemies to you, or pull yourself to enemies. And then you have like a fire sword, and you have you can set parties down as far as like fire allies. There's this spear attack that she has where if you press and hold the attack button, she'll charge the spear up to level 3 and throw it, and when it hits them, it sticks in them, stops them briefly, and then explodes outward with a bunch of spears. Or if you're holding it and you press the jump button, she'll hop up and come down like Final Fantasy Lancer and slam her spear into the ground, and all kinds of spears come out of the ground. It's a really cool game. And then the level 3 spells are huge, like explosive, fiery, or earthy spells that were originally showcased in the basically the announcement video. The only other thing with gameplay, I would say, is cinematics. Cinematics that are highly important to moving the story forward are beautiful and well animated and telling and powerful and well acted, and the lip sync is perfect, and those cutscenes are closer to what we get in most of our titles nowadays, especially on current gen systems, but even through PS4 gen, some PS3 gen games, Uncharted, etc. And then the other ones are like artificially intelligent, lip synced, and they clearly didn't put as much animation work or quality into the smaller cutscenes, to the point where sometimes like their lips don't move at all. There are some cutscenes that are like jarringly different from the really beautiful ones, but this is a Japanese game. It is not a Final Fantasy. It is not a Devil May Cry. It did not get this insane $250 million budget. And this team is a newer team in Square Enix, the Luminous team, using the Luminous engine, which has now, I think, made only 2 games in total, including Final Fantasy 15 and now Forspoken. The Luminous engine definitely needs some optimization work. It needs some work done. But overall, the cutscenes and the dialogue that we've seen running around on Twitter and on the internet is not a fair representation of the overall quality of the game. The overall quality of the game is actually quite high. It's got good production values. It's got, for the most part, it's beautiful, and it's almost always fun, with the exception of those small things that I said. Now, I will say that when the story started, it's about a girl named Alfrey. She's an orphan in New York City. At birth, they find her under the Holland Bridge, and that's why her name is Frey Holland. She struggles in life to make friends and get along and follow the rules, and she struggles. She's an orphan, and she can't find her way. The only real friend that she has is like the judge that keeps seeing her for all the laws she breaks, and her cat Homer. She loves cats, so we vibe. So essentially she, does the same old thing, gets into crime, gets with the wrong people. The wrong people start chasing her. During one of these chases, she's mysteriously transported to this magical kingdom by this piece of jewelry that she finds in a pawn shop that seems to call to her. And at first, this felt extremely cliche and silly, and I was like, the story's gonna be ho-hum. But in the end, I want to say that the story actually moved me so much that I had tears. Like it turned out to be, I thought I had predicted the story. Like somewhere 5 hours in, I was like, I already know what the story is going to be. It's going to be this, 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 and this, and none of those were correct. And the game actually had some really amazing twists that I did not see coming at all, and really surprisingly fantastic character development. Like when I started this game, I didn't really care about Frey, and then slowly but surely, I was like, okay, she's highly relatable. This person is a relatable person, and she actually talks a lot how I would talk. So y'all would hate me if I was ever on an adventure. We've already established that through Aloy, though. You end up actually really feeling for her, and the things that she's going through are, it all ends up being cohesive. She's not just some girl. She's a huge part of the story in the end, and not just her, but almost every character in the game. And it's actually quite a moving story. Back to gameplay real quick. There is a ton to do on the world map. The issue being that a lot of it's probably like 7 or 8 different things to do, copy pasted all over the map. And this is a huge map. I mean, massive. I have been playing for about 50 hours, and I have covered the scope of probably 45% of the map. The good thing being that all of these things that you do in the game either lend themselves to new equipment, new nails, which are painted with witch's blood, which is why they make her magic stronger, which I found to be a really cool thing. You get necklaces, you get cloaks, and you get nails, and then you get stat increases, you get new spells, you get new parkour moves. It's all pretty cohesive. It's fun enough that I kept engaged for the full 50 hours. I just finished the story at about the 45-hour mark and continued playing on to get like higher level 3 spells, because the level 3 spells are super spectacular and I wanted to see all of them outside of the menus. But you can kind of pick and choose your adventure and what you want to do and what you want to unlock, because you can actually upgrade all of the equipment that you get significantly enough through skills and collection that pretty much any piece of equipment is the best piece of equipment in the game. I didn't really go online and look to see if there's something better than what I'm wearing, because what I'm wearing has, because what I'm wearing has consistently been better than anything I've found as a result of me being able to upgrade it. You can also craft basically healing potions and the ability to carry more healing potions and more crafting materials. And then you learn how to like craft alchemy, basically crafting one material into a new material. It's all very basic and straightforward. The game doesn't seek to change up the rules of an open world game or gaming in general. It just rests on the laurels of what gameplay design has existed, and then adds things like parkour, magic, and high speed. So would I recommend Forspoken? Absolutely yes. It ended up being my favorite game in January, and now that I've played all the games in January besides Season, I can say that even above Dead Space, I enjoyed this game immensely. I found myself to be quite in love with it after, especially after the story, but even before the story, I found myself having a lot of fun with it. The demo was not a fair picture of what this game is or represents, and the reason for that being that you start somewhere like 25 hours into the game in the demo, and it doesn't give you any explanation of how to move or what to do or how to use your powers at all. And they are actually mapped to the triggers on the DualSense, which is super uncommon for a game like about magic, which would usually use like square or X, but all of these buttons are already mapped to other parkour capabilities and magical abilities. So definitely recommend. I would give Forspoken a B or a B minus, exclusively because of the inconsistency in production quality. Again, cutscenes being either the very bottom of the barrel on the spectrum or somewhere closer to the 75% mark in quality. So it's a great game. I highly recommend it. It's worth $70. I've gotten more gameplay out of it already than I know I will get out of Dead Space at all. And then I know I will get out of, say, something like Metroid Prime, both of which are fantastic games, and I am in no way crapping on them. I'm just telling you that Forspoken is worth the same price that you paid for those games, so long as you can get over those tiny little hiccups that break up the action, and that's really my only complaint about the game. It's a fairly large one, of course, and that's probably why I'd give the game like a B minus, but it is a really fantastic game, and I hope that most of you will at least give it a try outside of the demo so that you can see how the game actually works and come to your own conclusions and opinions instead of believing everything you hear on the internet. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon with probably a review of Dead Space, but you're going to see me when the PlayStation VR 2 comes out in 12 days anyway.